All right, ready to dive into something kind of spooky?
Oh, laying it on thick today, huh?
Well, think about it. Accounts on your computer running all the time, often with more privileges than you have.
Ah, you're talking Windows service accounts. Okay, yeah, gets a little creepy when you put it that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure those accounts don't turn into a security nightmare?
Good question. And luckily, we've got some solid info to work with today.
We do. We've got a Delinea blog post, pretty recent, from January 14th of this year. They lay out some best practices.
Best practices are good, but I'm also a big fan of hands-on advice.
And that's where our second source comes in. Cybersecurity expert Bert Blevins. He's got tons of YouTube videos with really practical tips.
Oh, I've seen some of his stuff. He's really good at breaking things down.
Yeah.
So we've got theory and practice covered. Nice.
Exactly. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only know how to protect yourself, but also sound like a cybersecurity pro.
I like the sound of that. Knowledge is power, as they say.
It really is. Yeah. So let's start with this Delinea post. They use this phrase, persistent access, to describe service accounts. Kind of unsettling, right?
Yeah, a bit. It's like these accounts are always there, always running in the background. Makes them a prime target if not handled correctly.
And that's the whole point of this deep dive, right?
Yeah.
Figuring out how to handle them correctly. Because, as Delinea points out, the stakes are pretty high.
Oh, yeah. Compromised service accounts can lead to some major issues. Data breaches, system crashes, the whole 9 yards.
And it's not just about hackers either.
Right. The Delinea post made a big deal about regulatory compliance, too. Things like GDPR and IPA.
You know, those are things most people don't really think about until it's too late.
It's true. But the consequences of non-compliance can be just as bad as a cyber attack, if not worse. Fines, lawsuits, reputational damage.
Definitely something you want to avoid. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of how to prevent these disasters. What were some of the specific recommendations from Delinea?
Well, one that stood out was their emphasis on managed service accounts, MSAs. Or, even better, group managed service accounts, GMSAs.
Okay, break those down for me. What exactly are these MSAs and why are they so important?
So imagine you've got a bunch of service accounts, each with its own password that needs to be managed. It's a headache.
Yeah. Even managing my own personal passwords is a pain.
Exactly. Now, multiply that by like 100 or 1,000, and you can see why IT admins pull their hair out. That's where MSAs come in.
They simplify things.
They do. With MSAs, you don't have to manually manage all those passwords. The system does it for you. Automatically generates strong passwords, rotates them regularly.
So less work for the admins and better security overall.
Bingo. It's a win-win. But, and this is a big but, MSAs aren't a magic bullet.
Right. Nothing in cybersecurity is foolproof.
Exactly. That's why Delinea also stresses the importance of the principle of least privilege. It's like a foundational concept in security.
Okay, remind me what that is again.
It's pretty straightforward, really. You only give an account the bare minimum permissions it needs to do its job.
No more, no less.
Right. It's like if you were hiring a gardener, you wouldn't also give them the keys to your house.
Makes sense. So limiting access is key. But I feel like we've talked about that before. Anything new or different in how Delinea approached it?
Well, they got kind of technical, talking about ACLs and RBAC.
Acronyms. Gotta love them.
Right. But basically, it's all about fine-grained control over permissions. ACLs let you specify who has access to what, while RBAC lets you group users and assign permissions based on their roles.
So it's like having a really detailed system for controlling who can do what on your computer.
Yeah.
And it's all about minimizing the potential damage if an account does get compromised.
Precisely. And of course, no security discussion would be complete without mentioning strong passwords. But Delinea takes it a step further.
Oh. They're not just talking about using password 123, are they?
No. They're talking about complexity, length, and most importantly, rotation.
Right, because even the strongest password can eventually be cracked if it's never changed.
Exactly. And this is where it gets tricky for a lot of people. Who has time to remember to rotate all their passwords regularly? It's a recipe for overwhelm. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
But that's where automation can be a lifesaver. There are tools out there that can handle password rotation for you.
That's good to know. So we're not just stuck with sticky notes and spreadsheets.
Definitely not. And speaking of practical tips, that's a great segue to our second source for today, Bert Blevins and his YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, the guy who makes cybersecurity actually understandable. I'm excited to dig into his videos.
Welcome back. We were just talking about all this great info from Delinea and how they're really pushing those managed service accounts.
Yeah, those MSAs sounded pretty handy, especially for bigger companies with tons of accounts to manage.
Yeah, for sure. But something that really stuck with me from the last part was that whole idea of cloud identity discovery.
Oh yeah, it's like you think you've got everything locked down, but then you realize there could be these hidden vulnerabilities lurking in the cloud.
Exactly. It's like, you left a window open somewhere, but you can't quite figure out which one.
And it makes you feel kind of vulnerable, right? Like anyone could just be sneaking in without you even knowing.
It's a bit unnerving for sure, especially since we're all moving more and more stuff to the cloud these days.
It's true. And it's not just those external threats we have to worry about either. We were talking about insider threats earlier, but I think that's something worth digging into a little deeper.
Oh, absolutely. Insider threats are a whole other can of worms. And when you're dealing with service accounts, which often have elevated privileges, the stakes are even higher.
Because if someone within the organization goes rogue or, gets their hands on those credentials,
the damage could be catastrophic. Think data leaks, sabotage system, crashes, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, that's a pretty scary thought.
Yeah.
So how do we guard against that? Is there any way to completely eliminate the risk of insider threats?
Well, completely eliminating risk is probably impossible, but we can definitely minimize it. And one of the key principles that Bert Blevins talks about a lot in his videos is the idea of need to know.
Oh yeah, like that old saying, loose lips sink ships.
Exactly. It's about limiting access to information and resources to only those who absolutely need it to do their jobs. And that applies to service accounts just as much as it does to human users.
So no more granting excessive permissions just in case.
Right. Just because a service account could theoretically access something doesn't mean it should. We need to be really intentional about those permissions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do you actually keep track of all that? Especially if you're worried about potential misuse from within.
That's where auditing and logging come in. Blevins is a huge advocate for this. He says you need to have a system in place that tracks all service account activity and flags anything suspicious.
So it's like having a security camera for your computer system.
Exactly. You want to be able to see who's accessing what when they're accessing it and whether those actions are authorized.
And if you see anything fishy, you can investigate further.
Right. It's all about being proactive and catching potential problems before they turn into major incidents.
But who's actually watching all those logs? It sounds like a full-time job.
Ideally, you'd have dedicated security personnel for that. But even smaller organizations can use automated tools to help with monitoring and alerting.
Oh, so it's not like you have to have someone staring at a screen 24/7.
No. Technology can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but you still need someone to be responsible for reviewing those alerts and taking action when necessary.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got strong passwords, MFA least privilege, and now we're adding this layer of monitoring and auditing. Anything else we should be thinking about in terms of insider threats?
Well, Blevins also talks a lot about the importance of background checks for employees who will have access to sensitive systems.
Oh yeah, you want to make sure you're not hiring someone with a history of, hacking or data theft.
Exactly. It's not a foolproof solution, of course, but it can help to weed out some of the more obvious risks.
It's a reminder that cybersecurity isn't just about technology, it's also about people.
Absolutely. You can have the best security tools in the world, but if you don't have a security-conscious culture within your organization, you're still vulnerable.
So it's about building that awareness and making sure everyone understands the importance of protecting sensitive data.
Exactly. It's about training employees on best practices, encouraging them to report suspicious activity, and creating an environment where security is everyone's responsibility.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about protection, but what about recovery? Let's say, despite our best efforts, a service account does get compromised. What's the game plan then?
That's where a solid incident response plan comes in. You need to know exactly what steps to take to contain the damage, investigate the incident, and restore your systems and data.
I'm guessing Bert Blevins has some thoughts on this too.
Oh, he does. He's a big believer in having backups of all critical data and systems.
Yeah.
And he stresses the importance of testing your restore procedures regularly.
Because what good is a backup if you can't actually use it when you need it?
Exactly. You don't want to be scrambling to figure things out in the middle of a crisis.
He used a great analogy in one of his videos. He said, it's like your house catching fire. You don't want to be trying to figure out your escape route while the flames are spreading.
That's a powerful image. It really drives home the point that preparation is key.
It can mean the difference between a minor inconvenience and a full-blown disaster.
And speaking of being prepared, there's one more area that Blevins often talks about that's often overlooked: physical security.
Wait, you mean like actually locking the server room?
That's right. It might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how often companies neglect this aspect of security.
So you're saying all those fancy firewalls and intrusion detection systems could be rendered useless by a simple unlocked door?
It's possible. It's like having a state-of-the-art security system for your house, but leaving the front door wide open.
Okay, point taken.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be thinking about both the digital and physical realms when it comes to securing service accounts.
Exactly. We need to be looking at all potential vulnerabilities and attack vectors. And with the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks, we need to be more vigilant than ever.
It sounds exhausting, to be honest.
It can be, but it's also an opportunity to learn and grow. By staying informed and adapting to new threats, we can not only protect ourselves, but also potentially gain a competitive advantage.
So,
While businesses that prioritize security are often seen as more trustworthy and reliable, and that can translate into increased customer loyalty and a stronger market position.
so it's not just about avoiding bad things, it's also about creating positive outcomes.
Precisely. Security is an investment, not just a cost.
Well said. Okay, I think we've covered a ton of ground here. From the basics of strong passwords and MFA to the complexities of insider threats, incident response, and the ever-evolving threat landscape.
We've touched on the technical details, the human element, and the importance of a holistic approach to security.
And yet, I bet there's still more to learn. We'll be back in part 3 to explore some of the tools and technologies that can help us manage and secure those all-important Windows service accounts. All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into these Windows service accounts. We've talked about so much already. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah, we've gone from like password 101 all the way to, insider threats and incident response. Pretty intense stuff.
It is. But before we wrap up completely, I think we should touch on some of the tools and tech that can help us manage and, actually secure these accounts, especially since things change so fast in cybersecurity.
Definitely. And, we've mentioned Delinea a few times already. They seem to be kind of leading the pack in this space.
Yeah, they've got a whole bunch of solutions, right? From password management to that, what's it called? Privileged access management.
Yeah, PM. It's a mouthful, I know.
But it sounds like it's more than just, keeping track of passwords in a spreadsheet.
Oh, for sure. PM is all about controlling, monitoring, auditing, like everything to do with those privileged accounts. And that includes service accounts, of course.
So is it like having a control panel for all those accounts with the keys to the kingdom?
That's a great way to put it. And Delinea's tools, like that unlimited admin mode thing we talked about earlier, that's exactly what they're designed to do, give you that control.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be real. Most of our listeners aren't running giant corporations. What about like smaller businesses or even just individuals? Are there any tools out there that are, a little more user-friendly?
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of cloud-based PAM solutions topping up these days.
Cloud-based. So no need to install and manage a bunch of complicated software yourself.
Exactly. It's all handled for you, usually as a subscription service.
Yeah.
Way more affordable and easier to get started with, especially for smaller teams.
Perfect. Any specific ones you can recommend?
Yeah.
For our listeners, of course.
Tricky. Can't really endorse any particular product, But a quick search for Cloud PAM solutions will turn up a ton of options.
All right. Good to know. So we've covered so much in this deep dive, from basic best practices to pretty advanced tools and techniques. It feels like there's a whole world of stuff to think about when it comes to securing these Windows service accounts.
There is. And as we wrap up, I think the biggest takeaway is that security is everyone's responsibility. It's not just for the IT folks or the cybersecurity experts.
So true. We all got to be aware of the risks, take those steps to protect ourselves and our data, and stay informed. Things are changing all the time.
Couldn't agree more. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. There's a whole community of security folks out there like Bert, Blevins, and the team at Delinea who are super passionate about helping people stay safe.
Absolutely. We'll be sure to include links to all those resources we talked about in the show notes. So to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay secure.